In this section of the Unit 6 notes, we're going to discuss deuterostomes. Deuterostomes include two phyla, phylum Echinodermata and phylum Chordata. Phylum Echinodermata includes the spiny-skinned animals, such as the starfish. Important characteristics of this phylum includes their development, in which they are deuterostomes, and this means that the blastopore in the gastrula eventually becomes the anus during development. This is different from the protostomes, where that blastopore becomes the mouth. The larvae of echinoderms are bilaterally symmetrical. However, the adults end up having pentamerous radial symmetry, which is a radial symmetry or symmetry around a center point that has 5 parts. One thing that makes echinoderms different from arthropods is their endoskeleton. If you recall, arthropods had an exoskeleton, which was a skeleton on the outside of their body. Well, echinoderms have an endoskeleton consisting of calcareous plates within the body tissues. Echinoderms also have a water vascular system, which is a network of fluid-filled canals within the body. It functions in gas exchange, feeding, and also locomotion. The tube feet are external extensions of this water vascular system, and this is often what the starfish or echinoderm uses to move around on the ground, or even to grab mussel or clamshells to open them up. Continuing with the various characteristics of echinoderms, we focus on the respiratory system. It seems that each of the different classes of echinoderms has a different respiratory organ, such as the dermal branchiae in sea stars, peristominal gills in sea urchins, genital bursae in brittle stars, and the cloacal trees in sea cucumbers. The nervous system appears to be more consistent throughout the classes. They all lack a brain, but they do have nerves that radiate out from central rings around the mouth into each arm of the body. Another unique characteristic of echinoderms is their regeneration ability. They have an ability to regenerate lost body parts to a degree that's not seen in other phyla of animals. For example, sea stars are capable of regenerating not only an individual lost arm, but in some cases, if the arm is cut off close enough to the body, that they can regenerate additional arms to create a second complete sea star. You can see this in the pictures there. You can see the starfish on the left is just regenerating one small arm, meaning it's growing it back. But in the one on the right, you can see that one arm is actually growing out a whole new body. So an extraordinary form of regeneration seen here. If you look at that starfish on the right, you may also notice that it has 6 arms. So there are some exceptions to the 5-part radial symmetry in echinoderms. Some have 6, and some have even more arms radiating out from the central disc. Sea cucumbers also have an interesting way of using regeneration as a defense mechanism. If they feel threatened by a predator, there are 5 classes of echinoderms that you are responsible for knowing in this class. The first class, Crinoidea, includes the sea lilies and feather stars. Class Ophiuroidea includes the brittle stars. They're called brittle stars because their arms often fall off, but of course they can regenerate them back. Class Asteroidea includes the starfish. Class Echinoidea, the sea urchins. And class Holothuriidea, the sea cucumbers. The second phylum of deuterostomes includes the chordates, or members of phylum Chordata. There are some major characteristics that all members of this phylum include. Now this may be interesting to you because you belong to this phylum. You are indeed a chordate, a special kind of chordate called a vertebrate. We'll talk more about that later, but let's now talk about the main characteristics of members of this phylum. All chordates possess a notochord, which is a fairly stiff rod of cartilage that extends along the inside of the body. Chordates also have a dorsal nerve cord that is a hollow cord dorsal, or to the back of the notochord. This was later modified into the brain and spinal cord in vertebrates. So you can see I have highlighted the dorsal nerve cord and the notochord in that simple chordate diagram at the bottom of the. A third characteristic of chordates are pharyngeal gill slits. The pharynx is a part of the throat immediately behind the mouth. In fish, these gill slits eventually form the gills from which they breathe. But in other chordates, especially the invertebrate chordates, they make up a filter feeding system. Now you may be thinking this is somewhat puzzling because we are chordates. Well, there was a point in your development as an embryo that you had pharyngeal gill slits. These, of course, are no longer part of your body and developed into something else. A fourth characteristic of chordates is the endostyle, which is a groove in the ventral wall of the pharynx. Ventral, remember, is towards the underside, or the belly side, which is a filter feeding structure and may also be the precursor of the thyroid gland in vertebrates. And the last characteristic of chordates is a post-anal tail, which is a muscular tail that extends backwards past the anus. There are 3 subphyla that you're responsible for knowing in this class. The first subphylum of chordates is subphylum Urochordata, which includes the tunicates. Now there are 3 classes of tunicates. First class is Acidiacea, which is a tough one to say, at least for me. And this is the sea squirts, which are sessile tunicates that actually grow on rocks. Then class Thaliacea, which are the salps, which are planktonic, which means they float around in the ocean. And also class Appendicularia, which are the larvaceans. Again, they are also planktonic tunicates. The second subphylum is Cephalochordata, which includes the lancelets, which is a very primitive chordate. It almost looks like it could be a fish, but it's lacking a skeleton. And then we have subphylum Vertebrata, which is the vertebrates. And that includes all animals that have the notochord modified to be a spinal cord. And we'll talk more about those in the coming sections of Unit 6 when we look at the many different groups of vertebrates. Please take some time to write down the questions for the video that you will be watching in class.